Hello everyone, and welcome to Fresh Master Channel. Today, we are going to have some story from Reddit. But before we start, don't forget to subscribe, like the video if you enjoyed it, and leave a comment down below. These simple clips mean a lot to the future of this channel.
For years, life had been a steady hum of routine. Tracy and I had built a life together brick by brick, raising 2 daughters, managing careers, and navigating the ordinary challenges of marriage. But when the last of our kids moved out, leaving the house eerily quiet, we found ourselves in unfamiliar territory. For the first time in decades, it was just us. No distractions, no noise, no buffer of busy schedules. It was exciting at first, a chance to rekindle the spark we had in the beginning, but it also exposed the cracks we had long ignored. I first noticed a shift in Tracy when she joined a new book club, which wasn't just about books. It was hosted at a trendy wine bar downtown, where the conversation often veered into fitness regimens, travel plans, and the kind of lives the younger attendees were carving out for themselves. Tracy came home from those evenings flushed with excitement, recounting anecdotes about so-and-so's new business venture or another's adventurous trip to Bali. I could see her eyes light up in a way I hadn't witnessed in years. Around the same time, she became more focused on her appearance. Tracy had always been naturally beautiful, but now she was investing in herself with a newfound intensity. Regular salon visits, new clothes, and hours at the gym. It was hard not to notice how heads turned when we went out. I admired her renewed confidence, though a small part of me wondered if she was looking for validation beyond what I could give her. My own life was quieter by comparison. I had my work, my routines, and the occasional evening spent with friends over a glass of whiskey and a game of cards. I told myself that Tracy and I were simply finding our own paths in this new phase of life, but I couldn't shake the sense that she was drifting further away. It was subtle at first, a missed laugh here, a distracted look there, but over time the distance between us became palpable. 6 months ago, I overheard her talking with a friend at a neighborhood barbecue. The conversation wasn't meant for my ears, but I couldn't help but catch a stray comment about how she envied people who found themselves later in life. The word stuck with me, and I began to question whether Tracy still saw herself as part of an us, or if she was searching for something I couldn't offer. Last week, I decided to take action. I planned a surprise dinner at our favorite restaurant, the one where we'd celebrated anniversaries and milestones. I wanted a reminder of the bond we shared, the years we'd spent building a life together. The evening started well, laughter, wine, and a lingering glance or two that hinted at the Tracy I fell in love with. But by the time we got home, that connection felt fragile again, like it could break with a single misplaced word. "Mark, you're utterly unbelievable," Tracy exclaimed, her voice radiating enthusiasm. Her words lingered in the room, creating a peculiar cocktail of joy and discomfort. The compliment hit me with an unexpected force, halting everything in its tracks. My chest tightened, my breath shallow as though I'd just sprinted up a steep hill. Wait just a moment. After nearly 3 decades of marriage, how could she harbor even a hint of memory about someone else? Worse, how could she let it slip aloud, especially during such an intimate moment? Up until that point, the evening had felt almost flawless. "God, Mark, you know exactly how to turn my world upside down," she said again, her tone dripping with admiration. I stayed where I was, head resting against her left thigh, motionless. Tracy lay there, her breathing still heavy. I couldn't tell if she even realized what she just said or the storm it had stirred in my head. "Aren't you going to keep going?" she asked after a beat, her expression shifting to mild confusion. "I'm wiped out, babe. You took everything I had," I replied, forcing a small smile. She leaned over to kiss me before settling back into the pillows. Normally, this was when we'd curl up together, basking in the afterglow before heading to the bathroom to freshen up. But as I lay there, Tracy drifted off quickly, her breathing softening into the quiet rhythm of sleep. I slipped out of bed carefully, washed up in the bathroom, and made my way downstairs. Wrapped in my robe, I poured myself a generous glass of Staley's rye whiskey and sank into the armchair in my den. My thoughts refused to settle. Sometimes having a mind that won't shut off is more of a curse than a blessing. Most men wouldn't have caught or cared about what Tracy said in the heat of the moment. But I'm not most men. As I sipped my drink, I replayed the evening in my mind, searching for any missed signs, anything to suggest there was something off in our marriage. But everything had seemed normal, better than normal, actually. Tracy and I had been more intimate in the past 6 months than we'd been in years. I chalked it up to finally being alone after raising kids for 25 years. In that time, Tracy had dropped 20 pounds and started dressing in a way that showcased her renewed confidence. At 51, she had reclaimed her college weight of 120 pounds and didn't hesitate to show it off. Her figure was stunning. Flawless skin, a sculpted waist, and legs that turned heads. She'd always been a natural beauty, and even with a little extra weight in the past, she exuded energy and vibrancy. I had no doubt she always would. We met in college as sophomores and dated for 2 years before tying the knot at 22. Tracy had always been a bit of a flirt, but it was playful and harmless, or so I believed. I never doubted her loyalty, not even once. Until tonight. Damn it. She's always known the power her looks gave her, wielding them like a charm that could disarm anyone. And she wasn't wrong. My thoughts drifted back to something I overheard 6 months ago at her office. Rhonda Nichols had been ranting in the break room, unaware that Tracy could hear every word. Earlier, Tracy had walked past Rhonda and Carl Walters, interrupting their conversation with nothing more than a smile. Carl had turned to watch her walk away, ignoring Rhonda entirely, much to her irritation. Tracy found the whole thing amusing. This wasn't a new experience for Tracy. She'd been commanding attention since her teenage years, thanks to her striking looks. Blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and curves that had heads turning wherever she went. Even now, she knew she could stop people in their tracks without trying. And while she privately acknowledged the extra weight she carried until recently, never seemed to dull her confidence or her allure. But Rhonda's irritation sparked something competitive in Tracy. Instead of joining her friends for lunch that day, she signed up for a gym membership, her resolve sharpened by Rhonda's offhand comments. Tracy had no intention of letting anyone, least of all Rhonda, think she was anything less than spectacular. Back in my den, now on my third drink, my thoughts wandered further back in time, to the day I first saw Tracy. We were sophomores at a big Midwestern university. I was the quiet math nerd, staying in shape but hardly standing out, while Tracy was nothing short of a goddess. She moved through campus like royalty, always surrounded by a crowd of admirers. I knew who she was, but I never had the nerve to approach her. Why would I? Guys far more impressive than me were practically throwing themselves at her feet. A few weeks later, I found myself at another party, nursing a beer in a quiet corner. My thoughts were interrupted when someone dropped into the seat next to me, pulling me out of my solitude. I turned my head, and to my disbelief, there she was, the woman who had starred in more than a few of my dreams. "So, what's the deal? Are you gay or bi?" she asked, her tone casual but direct. No judgment here, but let's be real. I haven't met a straight guy who hasn't tried to hit on me since I was 15. And you're not wearing a wedding ring, so spill it. What's your story? I felt my face flush hotter than it ever had before. My words stumbled over themselves like a nervous teenager. Meanwhile, her shirt rose and fell with her every breath, teasingly accentuating her beauty. Up close, she was just as stunning as she'd been from across the room, and my body was already betraying me. My so-called genius, IQ, completely useless in that moment. "Oh, I see how it is," she said, her eyes flicking downward with a smirk. No, I finally managed to choke out. Neither. I just figured someone like you wouldn't have time for a guy like me, not with all the handsome guys practically lining up. She tilted her head, amused. "Well, honey, sometimes we like a little mystery in our men. You should try it." We ended up leaving the party together, and by the time we graduated, we were married. I wasn't naive. I knew Tracy had her share of experience before we met, but I was confident in one thing. I knew how to please her in ways that went beyond the basics. That first night together, I turned her into a trembling mess, and I've been able to do it ever since, at least when she let me. Which brings me to tonight. It had been 2 weeks since Tracy and I last made love, the longest dry spell in our marriage outside of her pregnancies. She'd always had some excuse, too tired, not in the mood. Honestly, I stopped keeping track. That night, while she stood at the sink rinsing a pot, I decided I'd had enough. I approached her from behind, wrapping my arms around her in an affectionate gesture before leading her to the bedroom to spend some quiet, intimate time together. For a change, she was more vocal than I'd ever heard her in nearly 3 decades of marriage. Her usual incoherent cries were replaced with actual words, shouted ones. "Hell yes! Hell yes!" she screamed. And I'll admit I was enjoying myself, right up until she casually threw out her critique of my skills. That's when everything got a little too real. 2 weeks after the break room incident, Tracy started her campaign to charm Carl Walters in earnest. A work-related deal gave her the perfect pretext to invite him to dinner. On the surface, it seemed no different from her usual lunches with other agents. She was, after all, the top producer and senior agent. But this time, she made sure Rhonda knew about it. Tracy was professional enough to handle the business side first. After all, a paycheck is a paycheck. But once that was out of the way, she flipped the switch, transforming into Carl's newest confidant. Over a bottle of wine, she mined every detail about him. His football days, his personal life. He mentioned he had a girlfriend, but they weren't exclusive. Tracy leaned into the conversation, literally, ensuring Carl couldn't miss the way her blazer fell open to reveal her fitted blouse, the top few buttons left undone. A quick glance at his lap told her she'd achieved her goal. Men are so predictable, she thought. He's mine. He just doesn't know it yet. 5 more pounds, and I'll give him his reward. The private investigator I hired turned out to be worth every penny of the Hawaii vacation I'd sacrificed to pay him. What he uncovered made me reconsider taking any kind of trip with Tracy again. Turns out, she wasn't just fooling around with Carl Walters, but also a guy named Fred Lazarus, and even worse, her gym trainer. When the investigator handed me his report, he looked so uncomfortable I wondered if he was considering making a move on her himself. While I'm no stereotypical nerd, I've always kept a diverse group of friends, one of whom is Marty Bolins, a sharp and relentless attorney. Marty's the kind of guy who might not win a fight with his fists, but could crush someone's spirit in court. When I told him what Tracy had been up to, we both agreed. She wasn't getting away with this. Our state didn't allow no-fault divorces, and we weren't going to let her hide behind irreconcilable differences. As for Fred Lazarus, he was just supposed to be a one-night revenge fling, a lesson for Rhonda, who'd called her a cheese A. But Fred turned out to be more than a one-time thing. His skills, combined with his physique, were enough to convince Tracy to keep him around. Darren, the gym trainer, had been an accident, one suggestive touch during a workout session, and Tracy couldn't resist. 15 minutes later, they were tangled in his tiny apartment, tearing off their clothes like teenagers on prom night. Tracy arrived home about half an hour later than usual, still wearing her workout clothes. I walked in shortly after, catching her as she rushed upstairs to shower before heading back down to start dinner. She acted as though everything was perfectly normal, but I knew better. Tracy seemed invincible in her own mind, towering with the confidence of someone who thought they couldn't be caught. Despite the anger simmering inside me, I held myself together. Later that evening, after dinner, Tracy was tidying up in the kitchen while I relaxed in the living room, watching TV. The doorbell rang. Tracy called out, asking me to answer it, but I'd already seen through the window who it was. "Why don't you get it?" I replied casually. She shrugged, laughed, and opened the door. Moments later, she walked into the living room holding a manila envelope, her expression shifting from bemusement to shock. "What the hell is this?" she hissed, staring at the opened envelope. "How could you do this? What about our family?" "You're only mad because I beat you to it," I replied flatly. "If I'd given you more time, you would have served me first. Don't pretend this is about love. It hasn't been for a long time. I know about the others, or at least some of them." My throat tightened as I forced the words out. Tracy's face flushed deep red, shifting from shock to fury. "You think you know something?" she snapped. "Then say it. I'm listening." "Carl Walters, Fred Lazarus," I said, letting the names hang in the air. Then I pulled a small piece of paper from my pocket. "And Darren Trimble. Those are just the ones I know about." The color drained from her face, her confidence visibly crumbling. She sank onto the sofa across from me, staring at me like I'd just knocked the wind out of her. Clearly, she hadn't expected me to know as much as I did. "Well, maybe if you'd been more of a man, we wouldn't be having this conversation," she spat, attempting to regain her footing. I wasn't surprised by the attack. Sleeping with 3 different men had clearly given her a false sense of superiority. "Oh, so now it's my fault?" I replied, my voice weary. Apparently, 29 years of marriage doesn't earn loyalty anymore. Funny, because none of those guys were even born when we got married. Her eyes widened, realizing just how much I'd uncovered. She seemed ready to argue further, but stopped herself. "I'll let you stay in the house until it sells," I said, standing up. "You can explain everything to the kids and your parents. I'll grab the rest of my things later." I walked to the hallway closet and pulled out 2 suitcases I'd packed earlier. Tracy's face contorted in disbelief. "I'll have my lawyer handle the details. You should find one too." "This is over, Tracy." I didn't look back as I left, but I heard something crash against the wall behind me. Tracy hadn't been ready for divorce. though I knew she was planning it. She'd likely been working on a way to make me look like the villain. She realized our friends would side with me. They always liked me. And I knew she planned to manipulate the kids by attacking my masculinity, hoping they'd sympathize with her desire for excitement. Still, she hadn't expected me to take charge. She wondered if someone had seen her with one of her lovers and tipped me off, not realizing her behavior had been her own undoing. When she finally served me with divorce papers, she seemed startled by how well I was holding up. Truthfully, I felt lighter than I had in years. I was proud of myself as I left the house with my 2 suitcases. Tracy had no idea what hit her. I checked into a nearby motel, ready to start over. The one thing Tracy fought for tooth and nail was changing the reason for the divorce. She wanted me to file under irreconcilable differences instead of infidelity. It wasn't about money. She still got half of everything. But I suspected she wanted to twist the narrative to make me look like the bad guy. "There's no need for everyone to know our personal business," she shouted over the phone one night. "Change it to irreconcilable differences, and I'll sign immediately." "Nice try," I replied. "But your logic is as clear as glass. I'm not giving you the chance to rewrite the story. If anyone looks at the court records, they'll see the truth. You decided to cheat while we were still married. Now, you get to live with the consequences. You could have respected me enough to leave first. Instead, you made your bed." Her retaliation came through rumors. She spread lies about me being terrible in bed, hoping I'd cave. It stung, but what hurt most was when our youngest daughter, Allison, confronted me. "You're stalking Mom because you can't handle your ego being bruised," she accused. "If that's what she told you, then let's set the record straight," I said, my voice cold. "Your mother's not having an affair with just one man. She's juggling 3. That's right, 3 men, all around your age. She's supposed to be my partner, but instead she turned into someone I barely recognize." Allison's face fell as she stammered in disbelief, tears filling her eyes. I'd never spoken so harshly to her before, and the look on her face nearly broke me. She left my apartment in shock, and it took all my strength not to go after her and offer a comforting hug. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Tracy's mother, Barb, who hadn't spoken to me since the divorce proceedings began. We used to be close, but that was clearly no longer the case. "How could you say something so cruel to Allison?" she yelled as soon as I answered. "You idiot! That girl adored you, and now she's here on my couch crying her eyes out. What were you thinking saying those horrible things about Tracy?" "Barb, hold on," I said, keeping my tone calm. "You've only heard Tracy's version of the story, not mine. She's been seeing 3 different men behind my back. If you don't believe me, ask her yourself." "I have proof," Barb gasped, her sharp intake of breath loud enough to be heard clearly over the line. "What kind of proof? Mark, do you have photos, videos?" "Yes," I replied quietly. I wasn't planning to go nuclear, but apparently Tracy has decided to play dirty. "Dear God, no, that's not necessary, Mark. I'll talk to her. 3 men? I can't believe it. I'm so sorry." Her voice cracked and she hung up before I could say more. I sighed as I put down the phone. Barb had been like a second mother to me after my own mom passed away years ago. I could talk to her about anything, and she always listened. But now, I'd shattered her perception of her daughter, and it felt like I'd crushed her spirit in the process. The divorce, finalized a year later, was granted on the grounds of infidelity. During that time, Tracy continued her liaisons with her boys, though I stopped caring enough to keep track. My focus had shifted to moving on. A month after filing for divorce, I started noticing something strange. Women from different departments at the university began stopping by my office, checking on me. 2 women from the science department, whom I barely knew, came to my small basement office in the math building on separate occasions to offer support. Both left their numbers in case I needed to talk. They were both attractive, one divorced in her 50s, the other a widow in her 40s. I appreciated their concern, but couldn't understand why I was suddenly on their radar. Encounters like these became frequent. Women I'd barely interacted with over the years were now smiling, chatting, and going out of their way to be there for me. One afternoon, as I was leaving my office, Colleen, the department's administrative secretary, caught my eye and gave me a dazzling smile. Colleen was 35, recently divorced, with striking green eyes, glossy black hair, and a figure that turned heads. "Okay, Colleen," I said, stopping in my tracks. "What's going on? Did I inherit a fortune I don't know about?" She laughed, a mischievous sparkle in her eye. "You really don't get it, do you?" "Apparently not," I said, genuinely confused. She stepped closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "It's your weight loss, Mark. You've shed 120 pounds, and by that I mean your wife. You were always the sweet, smart guy, but as long as you were married, you were off limits. Now that your ring is gone, well, it's open season." I stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. She laughed at my expression. "Seriously, Mark, you're a rare find. Handsome, smart, kind, and single. Trust me, word got around fast. And just so you know," she added with a wink, "I'm submitting my application too." I'll add it to the queue," I stammered, flustered. She chuckled as she walked away. Meanwhile, Tracy had underestimated how quickly word of her actions would spread. She thought she could control the narrative, but within weeks, friends and family were calling her out. A month after I filed for divorce, Tracy's oldest friend, Marge Rochambeau, called her. "Are you out of your mind? How could you let the best guy in the world walk away from you?" Marge demanded. Tracy froze. How does she already know? She wondered. Marge lived 2 hours away in their hometown, and Tracy had assumed she had more time to spin the story before word reached everyone she knew. "It's complicated," Tracy began, trying to sound composed. "Complicated?" Marge scoffed. "Your mom spilled everything. She broke down crying in the middle of Walmart last week and told my mom the whole story. What were you thinking, Tracy? Cheating on a man who adored you?" Tracy's heart sank. She thought her family would stay quiet, but clearly that wasn't the case. Marge continued her rant. "You cheated on a man who was loyal, loving, and kind because you thought you deserved better. Newsflash, Tracy, you're not exactly the woman you were at 30. And guess what? You're about to hit middle age, too. Did you ever stop to think about that?" Tracy stammered, trying to come up with a response, but Marge cut her off. "I've always known you could be selfish, but I never thought you'd do this to Mark." The day my divorce was finalized, I found myself in my apartment, picking at a small salad and washing it down with several glasses of Buffalo Trace bourbon. Meanwhile, Tracy celebrated her newfound freedom with Carl, whisking him off to an upscale dinner before heading back to his place. It wasn't their first rendezvous, but something felt off for her that night. Despite her best efforts, she couldn't rekindle the same spark. Frustrated but unwilling to admit it to herself, or to him, she made her excuses and left. As she drove home, she reflected bitterly that her first night as a divorced woman had fallen spectacularly flat. 2 weeks later, I had dinner with Judy Scalise, a longtime mutual friend of Tracy's and mine. Judy was a safe choice for a first post-divorce date, someone who understood the history but wouldn't complicate things. I wanted to avoid misunderstandings. As we sat across from each other, I decided to let my guard down a bit. "You know," I said with a wry smile, "I thought I had women all figured out. 30 years of marriage, and I really believed I'd cracked the code. But here I am, completely clueless. What should I do next?" Judy, an artist with an unconventional charm, gave me a thoughtful look. She was a few years younger than me, yoga-toned, with luminous blue eyes and rich, dark hair. She'd always been striking, but I'd never let my thoughts drift in her direction. Until now. "Mark," she said with a soft smile, "I'm glad you called. Honestly, I didn't expect to be first on your list, but I'm honored. That said, let's not waste tonight rehashing you and Tracy. We can save that for coffee some other time. For now, let's just enjoy ourselves as two adults moving forward." "You're right," I agreed. "You can't move forward while looking backward." Encouraged, I stood up, leaned toward her, and kissed her. To my surprise, Judy rose to meet me, responding with a kiss so passionate it left me breathless. Before that night, I'd never considered Judy in a romantic or physical way. Sure, I knew she was beautiful and had a body that turned heads, but I'd never looked at her through that lens. My loyalty to Tracy had been absolute. But now, sitting across from Judy, I couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to hold her in my arms. My nervousness must have been obvious. I felt my face flush, but I pushed through, keeping the conversation light as we shared cheesecake and coffee. At the end of the meal, Judy tilted her head, her eyes twinkling. "You know," she said, her voice low, "I think we should head back to my place for a proper nightcap. Something tells me it's been a while for you, and I'd like to be the first woman after the Queen." Her forwardness both thrilled and terrified me. It had been a long time since I'd been with anyone, and I doubted my stamina. Would I measure up? And what if things went south? Judy knew both Tracy and me. The last thing I needed was for my insecurities to become gossip. When we arrived at her house, Judy disappeared briefly to change into something more comfortable, leaving me in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. When she returned, she was wearing a short terry cloth robe that barely reached mid-thigh. She ditched her bra, and the way the fabric clung to her left nothing to the imagination. My thoughts raced as we sat on the couch, chatting and sipping coffee. I tried my best to focus on her words, and not the way her robe shifted when she moved. "Mark," she said softly, breaking through my daze. "You with me?" I blinked, embarrassed. Judy took my coffee cup, set it on the table, and gently led me to her bedroom. Before I fully registered what was happening, she started undressing me with deliberate, patient hands. "Hold on," I whispered nervously. "It's been a while, and I'm not sure I can, pace myself." "Relax," she said with a smile. "We have all night." "Well, don't be too patient," I teased, slipping the robe from her shoulders. What followed was far better than I dared to hope. Judy's warmth and understanding calmed my nerves, and everything fell into place. As we lay side by side afterward, catching our breath, she turned to me with a teasing grin. "Did you have to be that irresistible?" she asked. "Of course," I replied, smirking. "It's part of the package." Judy laughed and nestled against me, turning her back so I could hold her. I wrapped my arms around her, and for the first time in months, I felt truly at peace. We fell asleep like that, tangled together, and I slept deeper than I had in years. I woke the next morning to find Judy's body pressed against mine. She turned her head, smiling at me. "Good morning, handsome," she said, her voice soft but playful. "Good morning," I murmured. "You're incredible, you know that?" She kissed me lightly and replied, "I could say the same about you." About a month after our divorce was finalized, Tracy invited Judy to lunch. Though they had been friends for years, Judy knew this wasn't just a friendly catch-up. Tracy had an agenda, and Judy suspected it involved prying into her recent time with me. For the first 10 minutes, they exchanged polite small talk, but Tracy wasted no time in steering the conversation toward her target. "So, lots of dates lately, Judy? That's a surprise," Tracy said, her tone sweet but sharp. She sipped her margarita, her smile feline as she waited for a reaction. Judy felt her cheeks flush. She had expected Tracy to bring me up, but wasn't prepared for the underlying hostility. Memories of the nights we'd spent together flickered through her mind, and she fought to keep her expression neutral. "Well, Mark is exceptional," Judy admitted, her voice tinged with awe. "You know that better than anyone." For a brief moment, Tracy's confidence faltered. She had assumed my talents wouldn't carry over to someone else, that our chemistry had been unique. Judy's tone made it clear that wasn't the case. "How could you let him go?" Judy continued, her words spilling out before she could stop herself. "Smart, sweet, handsome, and honestly a wizard in the bedroom. Are you crazy?" Tracy's smile froze, then faded entirely. She quickly shifted the subject, steering the conversation into safer territory. Judy played along, knowing she had already said more than enough. Meanwhile, across town, Molly Hamilton lay curled against my side, her head resting on my chest. Her breathing was steady and soft, a stark contrast to the wild, unrestrained passion we had just shared. It had been raw and intense, leaving me exhausted but deeply satisfied. I felt both battered and triumphant, as though I'd just conquered a mountain. If I live to be 100, I thought, I'll never figure women out. Tracy had told me I wasn't enough for her sexually, yet here I was, 3 months post-divorce, making a 32-year-old scream loud enough to wake the neighbors. None of it made sense, but I wasn't complaining. I had met Molly at the gym. She wasn't there to flaunt herself or seek attention. Her focus was on the machines, sweat pouring as she pushed herself hard. Something about her determination caught my eye, and I waited until she finished her workout before approaching her. I wasn't in the habit of asking women out since my divorce, despite the signals I'd received from a few. But Molly was different. She had an effortless magnetism that drew me in. I introduced myself and asked if she'd like to come over one evening for coffee and dessert. She hesitated briefly, her green eyes studying me before agreeing. She entered her name and number into my phone and smiled, her beauty disarming. As she walked away, I called her number. She turned at the sound, eyebrows raised. "Now feels like the right time to ask. How about Thursday evening?" I said, grinning. Her face broke into a radiant smile. "Thursday it is. Let's meet at Laszlo's at 7. For the rest of my workout, I felt invincible. That Thursday, I arrived at Laszlo's 10 minutes early, found a quiet table in the back, and ordered cheesecake. Molly walked in moments later, her long blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing snug jean shorts and a cropped t-shirt that highlighted her toned figure. She wasn't wearing a bra, and the way her chest moved as she approached was hard to ignore. She caught me looking, raised an eyebrow, and smiled knowingly. Embarrassed, I smiled back. We spent 2 hours talking over coffee and dessert. Molly was sharp, funny, and completely captivating. I wasn't sure if she was as interested in me as I was in her, but she agreed to a second date. That Saturday, we visited an antique car museum before heading to dinner. The evening ended at my apartment, where one thing led to another. Let's just say I wasn't out of practice after all. While I was drifting off to sleep next to Molly that night, Tracy was across town, with a much younger man she had met earlier in the evening. Their encounter was hurried and mechanical, leaving her unsatisfied. As she drove home, she couldn't help but wonder if her choice of younger partners was part of the problem. Carl had broken things off a month earlier, explaining that he wanted a relationship leading to marriage and children, neither of which Tracy could offer. Though he'd been kind about it, the breakup had stung. As she pulled into her driveway, Tracy considered that perhaps it was time to look for someone closer to her age. Younger men were fun, but the lack of meaningful conversation was wearing thin. Being with Molly made me reflect on my time with Tracy. From my limited experience before our marriage, I had always suspected Tracy wasn't particularly skilled in bed. She didn't need to be. Her looks had always been enough to captivate men. Over the years, I made peace with it because I loved her, convincing myself that what we had was the best it could be. But now, with Judy, Katie, and Molly, I realized just how wrong I had been. True closeness was a connection far deeper than I had ever experienced with Tracy. As I lay in bed that night, with Molly's warmth beside me, one thought lingered. Tracy had fooled me again. Not with lies, but with the belief that what we had was as good as it could get. She couldn't have been more wrong. 2 weeks after the wedding invitations went out, my phone buzzed with an unexpected call from Tracy. I hadn't spoken to her in months, and during my visits with our daughters, her name rarely came up. I'd made it clear that while I wanted them to respect and love their mother, my relationship with her was over. They'd honored that boundary. "Mark," Tracy began without preamble, "April wants to know if we can be civil long enough to survive her wedding. Robert finally popped the question, and she wants us both there, but only if we can behave ourselves." "I haven't heard from April yet," I replied, keeping my tone even. "But you can assure her I'll be a perfect gentleman, especially if you can remember you were once the woman I loved. I'll tell her the same when she calls me with the good news." The next day, April called to share her excitement. I congratulated her and repeated what I'd told Tracy, adding that I was happy to help cover the costs and hoped she'd enjoy planning the event with her mother. On the day of the wedding, walking April down the aisle was an experience that caught me completely off guard. My little girl, who once sang silly songs and carried her favorite doll everywhere, had grown into a radiant, confident woman. Those 30 steps felt both fleeting and endless as a flood of memories played in my mind. By the time I handed her to Robert at the altar, my composure broke, and tears rolled down my cheeks. As I returned to my seat, Tracy leaned over, her own eyes wet, and kissed me gently on the cheek. Later, during the father-daughter dance, we swayed to a soft waltz. The moment felt surreal, but it passed too quickly. Afterward, the music shifted to a livelier beat, and the younger crowd flooded the dance floor. I retreated to the bar for a scotch, letting the evening's emotions settle. I wasn't there long before I saw Tracy slow dancing with a man easily 30 years her junior. I approached and politely asked the young man if I could cut in. Tracy lit up with a grin and extended her hand toward me, leaving the boy no choice but to step aside. "You don't trust me with these kids, do you?" she teased as we began to dance. "Half the world thinks I'm a strumpet thanks to you. That poor guy probably thinks I'm ready to take him home." "If that's what you're looking for, I can bring him back," I replied dryly. "But I thought you might prefer dancing with someone who doesn't think Beyoncé is the height of musical genius." "Touché," she said with a smirk. "Well, unless you're planning to stab me right here on the dance floor, I think we've done pretty well this weekend." I nodded. "We have. It's probably the most mature we've been around each other in years." "True," she admitted with a soft laugh. "At least we waited until the kids moved out before we fell apart." We danced through a couple of songs before her previous partner returned, nervously asking if he could cut back in. To Tracy's surprise, I stepped aside without hesitation. Back at the table, my youngest daughter, Ellie, joined me. Watching her mother on the dance floor, she said in a half-joking tone, "Do you think I'll have to worry about men stalking her in the nursing home?" I glanced at Ellie, catching the flicker of seriousness behind her humor. She continued without waiting for a response. "What about you, Dad? Mom says you've been dating, but I get the sense no one's come close to replacing her." "I'm fine, sweetheart," I replied. "Better than fine, actually. Your mom doesn't know as much about my life as she thinks she does. I'm not looking to replace her. I'm just living my life." Just then, Wendy Adams approached our table. Wendy and her late husband, Earl, had been family friends for years. Earl and I were especially close before he passed away. Wendy still kept in touch with Tracy, but we hadn't seen each other much since Earl's end of life. Tonight, she looked radiant in a figure-hugging dress that hinted she hadn't let the years slow her down. "Care to join us?" I asked. Wendy smiled warmly, but shook her head. "Actually, I was hoping to steal you for a dance." Ellie raised an eyebrow, but quickly grinned. "Go ahead, Dad. Shake a leg." As Wendy and I made our way to the dance floor, Ellie leaned in and whispered, "Coincidences like this only happen in the movies, Dad." We danced through a couple of songs before retreating to the bar area, where we found a quiet corner to sit and talk. As we chatted, Wendy suddenly took my hand, her expression serious. "Mark," she said, locking eyes with me, "are you still in love with her? Because if you are, I won't make a fool of myself by asking you to dinner." Her question caught me off guard. I'd always thought of Wendy as Tracy's friend, and though I admired her, I'd never considered pursuing her. But now, sitting here with her, I realized how much I enjoyed her company. "I'll always love her in some way," I admitted, "but I'm not in love with her anymore. That part of my life is over." Wendy smiled softly. "Good, because I'm not a young girl anymore, Mark. I've been alone for 8 years, and there aren't many men I'm interested in. If I see someone I care about, I'm not going to hold back. Tracy let you go. It's been 3 years since your divorce, and you're not hers anymore. So, if you're willing, I'd like to see where this goes." Wendy blushed as she spoke her last words, her cheeks coloring in a way that made her look younger. I couldn't help but feel a sudden, irresistible urge to be the one to help her get back on the horse, as she'd put it. I handed her my phone, and she entered her number with a quick, shy smile. Just as she was handing it back to me, April and Robert emerged from the reception hall, searching for me. April recognized Wendy immediately, and they exchanged pleasantries. After a brief chat, Wendy gracefully excused herself. "You better get back in there and play father of the bride," she teased before walking away. As she left, I reached out, took her hands in mine, and leaned in to plant a light kiss on her lips. "To be continued," I said softly, watching her blush deepen as she nodded and smiled. The rest of the evening unfolded with the usual wedding traditions, cutting the cake, toasts, and dancing. But Tracy, to my surprise, barely left my side for the remainder of the night. I couldn't help but wonder if April had mentioned my conversation with Wendy. Tracy's behavior felt tinged with jealousy, a sentiment I hadn't seen from her in years. I'll admit it was flattering, even after everything that had passed between us. Later, as the evening wound down, April shared an anecdote with her mother. "We interrupted Dad and Wendy Adams earlier," she said. "They looked pretty cozy, and I'm pretty sure they kissed before she left." Allison chimed in with a mischievous grin, adding that Wendy had looked like a smitten teenager while dancing with me. Judging by Tracy's expression, she didn't share Allison's enthusiasm. By the end of the night, Tracy and I found ourselves alone in the hotel lobby. She had arrived by taxi, so I offered her a ride home. She accepted on one condition, that we stop for a drink at the hotel bar. Considering how well we'd gotten along that evening, a rarity in recent years, I agreed. We found a small table near the bar, and I ordered for both of us. "Bourbon on the rocks for the lady, and I'll have a stolly," I told the waitress. Tracy smiled faintly. "It's nice that you still remember. You're still the only woman I've ever known who drinks whiskey properly," I replied with a smirk. Tracy hesitated, then blurted out, "Are you going to date Wendy Adams?" She flushed deeply, covering her cheek with one hand. "I didn't mean it like that," she stammered. "It just slipped out, but are you? You've dated so many beautiful women since the divorce. It's like you didn't even miss me. Was all this part of some grand plan to sow your wild oats?" I lowered my glass, holding her gaze for a long moment before answering. "That's an interesting theory, Tracy," I said evenly. "But I seem to remember someone else doing the oat sowing while we were still married. To this day, you've never explained why you treated me that way. Why you disrespected the man who was ready to grow old with you." Tracy's expression shifted, a mix of regret and pain crossing her face. She sighed deeply. I made a mistake, Mark, a terrible, stupid mistake. I stayed silent, letting her continue. I was terrified of getting older. I started chasing a thrill, trying to prove to myself that I could still turn heads, still make men want me. The attention from younger guys felt like proof that I was still desirable. But it wasn't about the sex. It was about the excitement of being wanted by someone new, someone younger. And I let myself believe that what I had with them was better than what we had. I was too blind to see that I was wrong. Her voice wavered. After you left, the thrill disappeared. It turns out there's nothing exciting about meaningless encounters. Sure, it felt good for my ego to know that younger guys still found me attractive. But there was no depth, no connection. And damn it, Mark, I'd do anything for the kind of closeness we used to have. I sighed, leaning back in my chair. Have you considered dating someone your own age? Someone who's in the same stage of life, who understands what it means to build something real, even if he can't keep up with a 25-year-old in every way? Tracy met my eyes, her voice quiet but resolute. That's what I'm trying to do now, Mark. I'm done chasing after boys who don't know what they want. She paused, her eyes filling with tears. We had 30 good years together. I know I don't deserve it, but can you forgive me? Can we try again? A single tear rolled down her cheek as she waited for my response. Before everything fell apart, I would have held Tracy in my arms and tried to make the world a better place for her. Even now, after all that had happened, part of me still felt that pull. But this wasn't 3 years ago. Back then, her apology might have meant something. Now it felt more like a desperate attempt to rewrite history. I shook my head slowly. Tracy, let's be honest. We had about 29 good years together, not 30. This last year doesn't count as anything but chaos, and this isn't a fairy tale. In the real world, we wouldn't make it. Come on, let me take you home. After the wedding, I waited a week before calling Wendy Adams. We'd had an electric connection at the reception, but I didn't want to rush things. When I finally called, we planned a date at a lovely seafood restaurant in a nearby town. Wendy wore a sleek, form-fitting dress that caught every man's eye, but unlike Tracy, she seemed oblivious to the attention. Her focus was entirely on me, and I couldn't help but be captivated. Dinner was fantastic, great food, paired with effortless conversation. Afterward, we went back to her house for dessert and a drink. She poured us both a glass of cognac, and as we finished our drinks, she stood, took my hand, and led me upstairs. The room she brought me to wasn't the master bedroom. It was clear she couldn't bring herself to share that space, the one she had shared with Earl, with anyone else. I respected her unspoken decision. Wendy didn't need to ask me to be gentle. I knew Earl had been her great love, and she likely hadn't been with anyone since his passing. I started slow, kissing her lips softly as I helped her undress. She returned the favor, her hands trembling slightly as she helped me out of my clothes. Her body was beautiful, natural, full, and still defying gravity. Tenderness gave way to passion, and soon I saw a fiery side of Wendy that I hadn't expected. Afterward, as we lay entangled in each other's arms, her breathing slowed into the steady rhythm of sleep. I watched her for a long moment, struck by how angelic she looked. It had been years since I felt this kind of connection with someone. Not just physical, but emotional. I eventually drifted into the best night's sleep I'd had in years. The next morning felt different from any other I'd experienced since my divorce. It reminded me of lazy Sundays from my married days, when Tracy would be downstairs making breakfast and the girls would run around playing. But this wasn't Tracy, and there were no children, just Wendy in the kitchen, frying bacon and brewing coffee. I pulled on some trousers and went downstairs. Wendy greeted me wearing nothing but my shirt, the sleeves rolled up and the buttons haphazardly done. She looked stunning. "Hope you don't mind," she said with a smile. "Your shirt smelled like you, and I wasn't ready to give that up just yet." "Well," I replied, grinning, "what's a man got to do to get some breakfast around here?" She stepped closer, and I pulled her into a tight hug. She smelled of coffee, bacon, and the lingering scent of last night's closeness. It was perfect. We ate and talked, making plans for the day. It was a Saturday, and the possibilities felt endless. For the first time in years, there was no me or you. It was all about what we would do. Then an idea hit me like lightning. "This might sound crazy," I said, setting down my coffee, "but how about we get married today?" Wendy blinked, then smiled. "You always did have a sharp mind," she said with a grin. "I'll do whatever you think is best." The local justice of the peace had Saturday hours, so I called to see if he was available at 4 p.m. He was. That gave us just over 7 hours to prepare. I asked Wendy's 28-year-old son, Aaron, to be my best man. Once I explained that the bride was his mother, he agreed enthusiastically, saying he'd bring his wife and daughter along. Wendy called her mother to ask if she'd be her maid of honor. The phone was on speaker, and when her mom heard the news, she burst into tears of joy, immediately agreeing. I called my daughters, April and Allison, inviting them along with April's husband, Robert. "I think you'll like what's happening today," I teased. Wendy, smiling mischievously, asked, "Should I invite Tracy?" I paused. "Only if you really want to," I said carefully. "But I'd rather not. She's been through a lot, and I don't want this to feel like a victory lap." We secured a small banquet room at a friend's restaurant for a reception. As the hours ticked by, we each invited a handful of friends and family to join us for what was shaping up to be a perfect, spontaneous celebration. Before heading to a jewelry store to pick out wedding rings, Wendy almost literally bumped into Tracy on the sidewalk outside her favorite boutique. Tracy, juggling several shopping bags, greeted Wendy warmly. Though their friendship had faded over the years, they'd known each other for more than 25 years, and the conversation started off pleasant enough. Then Tracy noticed the 2 rings on Wendy's left hand. "Oh my God, Wendy, those rings are stunning!" Tracy exclaimed. Wendy's face turned a deep shade of red, and it was as if a light bulb suddenly went off in Tracy's mind. "Wait, are you married to Mark?" Tracy asked, her voice faltering as she swayed slightly, her face pale. Wendy quickly grabbed her shoulders to steady her. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know," Tracy said, her words rushed and uneven. "It all happened so fast," Wendy admitted, still blushing. "We didn't make a big announcement." "That doesn't sound like the Mark I remember," Tracy said, managing a faint smile. Wendy hesitated, then said softly, "Have you ever just known something was right? Like you couldn't let it slip away?" That's how it felt. Realizing her words could sting, Wendy quickly backtracked. "I didn't mean—" "It's okay," Tracy interrupted with a forced smile. "I get it, Wendy. Trust me. I've made mistakes. Just promise me one thing. Don't let him go." Later, sitting in her therapist's office, Tracy sighed dramatically. "There must be good men out there, right? I mean, they were everywhere when I decided to leave Mark. And now, gone. It's like they vanished." Dr. Ellen McForrest, her longtime therapist, didn't mince words. "You're intelligent, Tracy. You must have known there are very few good, available men at your age. But instead of focusing on those rare gems, you chased a fantasy, young men who were never going to stick around. Did you really think great sex could replace a meaningful connection? You can't just have fun forever. Eventually, you'd have to build a life with someone." Tracy groaned. "God, Doc, sometimes life really sucks." Fast forward 10 years. I'm standing on the back porch of the cozy 2-bedroom house Wendy and I bought shortly after our whirlwind wedding. We didn't want to live in the shadow of old memories, so we found a home that was entirely ours. It's perfect for us. Small, but with plenty of space for family gatherings. These days, we're proud grandparents 6 times over. I'm grilling steaks when Wendy steps outside, carrying 2 glasses of whiskey on the rocks. She hands me one with a warm smile, and I lean in to kiss her lightly on the lips. At 63, Wendy looks incredible. Her dedication to staying active and healthy paying off. Her light brown hair is streaked with gray, but she still turns heads when she gets dressed up for our casual date nights. We're not kids anymore, but we're far from slowing down. Between laughing with our grandchildren and our twice-weekly escapades in the bedroom, sometimes even in the shower, it's safe to say we're enjoying life. Modern medicine truly is a miracle. Looking back, I once thought I'd spend my life with Tracy. I loved her deeply. But now, I can't imagine growing old with anyone but Wendy. In a strange way, I'm grateful for the heartbreak Tracy caused. It led me to the life I have now. I see Tracy occasionally. We exchange pleasantries, mostly about the grandchildren, but the sadness in her eyes is always there. She doesn't look well. The vibrancy she once carried is gone, replaced by a shadow of regret. She's constantly apologizing, though she never says exactly what for. At 65, Tracy's once admired figure has changed. Though she still dresses well, she's aware that she no longer catches men's eyes as she walks through the mall. Her cheesecake curves have returned, but they no longer turn heads. One day, as she's leaving the mall, she spots me walking toward her. Straightening up, she manages a smile. "Hello, Tracy," I say warmly, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "You're looking well." She blushes faintly, and we exchange small talk for a few minutes. The conversation drifts to the grandkids, our shared joy, and then I glance at my watch. Well, I should get going, I say. Mark, she says softly, hesitating. I'm really sorry. I meet her gaze, pausing for a moment before giving her a kind smile. Take care, Tracy, I say simply. And with that, I turn and walk away, leaving her behind, not just on the sidewalk, but in every sense. Moving forward, as I always have. Years later, as I sit on the porch of the house Wendy and I share, the twilight casts a golden hue over the garden we planted together. The days feel fuller now, brimming with laughter, quiet moments, and a sense of belonging I once thought I'd lost forever. I watch Wendy tending to her roses, her movements graceful and sure, as if every petal she touches blossoms a little brighter for her care. The past feels distant, like a novel I once read and set aside, the pages now yellowed with age. Tracy occasionally crosses my mind, not with bitterness, but with a quiet acceptance. She was a chapter, a significant one, but not the ending. Life, as it turns out, is far better when shared with someone who understands you, flaws and all. Tonight, Wendy brings out 2 glasses of wine, a soft smile playing on her lips. We toast to nothing in particular, simply reveling in the luxury of time spent together. The years have left their marks on us, but they've also deepened our connection, polishing what we have into something rare and enduring. As the sun dips below the horizon, the sky painted in hues of amber and violet, I realize something. Happiness isn't about finding perfection. It's about building something beautiful from imperfections, together. Wendy places her hand over mine, and I know without a doubt I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. The past has its place, but this is mine now, and it's everything I could ever hope for.